Before this podcast, we would like to give a massive thanks to Keith at KMR Audio, who has provided us with all the equipment we have needed to launch our podcast.
Keith has hooked us up with some premium equipment, and if you're in the market yourself for some high-end audio recording equipment, then head over to kmraudio.com.
The balls are shown. The balls are shown. The balls are shown.
Hello and welcome to the Ball Sessions. You're here with Ross Jeffries, Henry Martin,
Good afternoon, Ross.
and Tom West.
Hello, Ross.
We are three old mates that used to go to school together, and we have finally decided to take the plunge and create our own podcast. So, Henry, what are the Ball Sessions?
So the Ball Sessions is a podcast started by us three where we delve deeper into the lives of millennials. So looking at anything which is interesting in their lives or kind of great achievements that they've achieved.
Yeah, so it might sound like quite a suspicious name, but we're not here to chat shit, guys. We're here to be serious. And the reason why it is the Bull Sessions, according to Google, that means an informal group discussion. And that's kind of the vibe we're looking for here.
This is as about informal as a podcast could probably get, I would imagine.
Exactly, yeah.
But that's what we want to do. We want to be able to delve deeper into these people, like Henry said, and engage with them in a less formal way that also allows them to tell the story of what they're doing.
And Tom, tell us the story of how it came about, the three of us coming together with this idea.
Okay, so Ross and myself had this idea probably 6 months ago. Stuff got in the way, so university graduations, and we got back in touch sort of September time when Henry had also graduated, and we went out for a beer and discovered that Henry has a passion for podcasting. Or listening to podcasts.
I do absolutely love listening to them. Any variety of podcasts I absolutely love to engage with. I think that's a big inspiration behind this, isn't it? I think all three of us share a passion for podcasts.
Yeah.
And share a passion for millennials.
Yeah.
And the fact that all three of us have listened to quite a vast variety of them, and the fact that none of us have really come across youngsters either hosting nor being interviewed is part of what I wanted to sort of fill that gap and the void that is in the market. So for something that's so sort of widely saturated, for there to not be any youngsters doing what we're attempting to do and hopefully achieving is quite astounding.
I think when you look at the iTunes top charts, you see all these kind of variety of podcasts which are hosted by famous people and do I dare say celebrities. I think we've definitely got something different. What we're covering, hopefully, isn't what other people cover, and I think that's important.
I think there's obviously stuff out there talking about millennials, but we want to delve into millennials that have really kind of started something or done something very impressive. So we're looking at business people, sports people, musicians, people who have started their own beers, anyone really who's started a movement or been really critical in their field.
Tom, that's quite funny that you mention the fact that we may be interviewing millennials that have created their own beer, because in the Ball Sessions calendar, as is, we have the creators and the founders of Jebel Beer, a demi-piche beer that they came up with the idea as they were in the midst of an après-ski. It's a really interesting product. In fact, the three of us have been sampling it this evening.
Exactly, and it's definitely a guest that we're looking forward to having on the podcast.
And to find out more, you'll have to listen to that podcast coming Wednesday.
Hopefully.
Good plug. So going back to the aims of the podcast, I feel that's a good thing to discuss about now.
I agree. So for me personally, I'd like to get to know these people and not just find out about what they've written on their website or what their company is or what's on their Twitter, but the story behind it. So learning about how they've got there, because I think that's what makes their stories most impressive.
Yeah, and I feel that it's something that isn't really portrayed much in media, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Hopefully this podcast will be an opportunity to understand the lives or the process in getting to where they have kind of reached.
Exactly. So you might hear about very extraordinary stories happening, but these people starting their own companies, succeeding in sport, for example, you often don't hear about how they've got there And I think this is hopefully a good platform to tell that story and engage some people with those things.
It's certainly something I've come across because I'm a 22-year-old in a profession where the average age is the mid-50s. So to see so many barriers almost of entry into certain aspects of life, it's always promising the fact that there is proof out there that people can go against what is sort of widely assumed and what the media sometimes tells us. And the fact that they've gone against those stereotypes and have actually created a brand, a product, whatever it may be, and have been successful.
Part of this podcast will be to, I guess, almost flip the stereotype of the lazy generation, of a generation who's disinterested or who are always on their phone. I mean, I think the world's changing, and I think it'd be interesting to hear what these people have got to say.
Sorry, just let me finish my text.
Oh, sorry. Oh. That was a classic joke for those listeners who can't see what we're doing.
All of the listeners.
Yeah, and along with kind of changing the stereotypes, another thing we want to do is raise these profiles, don't we?
Yeah, it's nice for them as well because, you know, often they're at a kind of younger stage in their career, so it's also good for them to be able to put themselves out there. And obviously, if this pod can do that, then that's also a positive.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what we're trying to get across. And I think almost most importantly, all three of us are interested in millennials. We're interested ourselves in what they have to say.
It's a natural merger because we like podcasts and we are millennials.
And that wasn't scripted.
No, it was not. So looking at guests.
Okay, yeah.
If you could pick any millennial pod interviewee, Henry Martin,
Yes.
who would it be?
Okay, that's a good question. And this is looking into the future. Okay, so this is hopefully once our podcast has grown.
Yeah,
Got more
I've heard that if you say you're going to do something, you're more likely to do it.
Yeah.
Belief is sort of half the goal.
Okay, so going back to guests, I think my ideal guest would be Kevin Pierce, who is or was an American snowboarder, a freestyler who was very successful at what he was doing. But unfortunately, he had a terrible injury in the run-up to Vancouver Olympics. And he's done a lot now with charity and kind of supporting brain injury and kind of brain recovery. And I think that would be, for me personally, a great guest to have on.
I like it, Henry. Think outside the box.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's something a bit different, which maybe not many people have heard of.
Exactly.
But I think the story behind it is extremely interesting, I think.
I love it.
Tom, same question goes back to yourself.
Okay.
Who would yours be?
Post Malone Ross.
Ooh,
Interesting.
Post Malone.
I'm a big fan of him at the
Interesting.
moment, actually.
Because he's only 21, right?
He is, I think.
21, 22. Yeah, so he's about our age.
Meteoric rise as well.
In the
Fresh
lo-
from nowhere.
in the last
Questionable
I
face tattoos.
also love barbed wire tattoos.
Questionable
Yeah.
when you get them on your forehead.
I don't know. I think I've listened to a few pods that he's been on, and I think he'd be a good guest. He's got a lot about him. He's a bit weird, but
I think
like that.
that's kind of what makes him so.
He's almost normal.
liked. Yeah,
Yeah.
Endearing, if you will. Yeah. So I think Post Malone, short and sharp. Ross, what about you?
I would probably say Malala, purely because of how much adversity she overcame, not only receiving an education at all, but to move on towards getting a place at Oxford. She's actually got one of the best educations in the world that she could possibly have at this point in time.
Can you explain her story for people that may not know?
So the Taliban took exception for her wishing to get an
Yeah, it
education,
was like
and she
going to
ended
school.
up getting shot in the face.
Yeah.
And she still not laughed in their face, but she stood up to them and continued to strive to getting an education and ended up winning the Nobel Peace Prize.
And then I don't know what happened because I saw that she on her Wikipedia page she had her schools listed as over here. So did she like get fast tracked over here or something?
I actually have no idea, mate.
We'll find out when we get her on.
Yes, exactly.
I like it.
Yeah.
So we'll get in contact with those three guys then this week.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this will be come back in a year's time, and these will be the
All three will be on there.
We'll have
type-
one after the other
the type of guests we'll be having. Hopefully, fingers crossed.
I think
when we're slightly smoother and maybe have employed a few people into the Bull Session philosophy.
Okay, so let's talk about millennials, because if we're going to be slinging that term about every pod, we're going to need to have an understanding of what kind
Yes.
of demographic we're looking at here.
It's actually really quite interesting because as the internet can never agree on a certain answer, there's such a wide range of correct answers and correct year ranges. But typically, falling back on trusty Wikipedia, it says, as a millennial, I love Wikipedia. It got me through half of my school life.
Half. That's important to know. Half.
Yeah, it kind of let me down on the A-level side. But
Stay in school, kids.
that's a story for another day. But it's basically the early 80s all the way through until as late as the early 2000s.
Okay.
So us, as all three of us were born in 95, 96.
Yeah.
We fall actually quite late into that.
Yeah.
So whereas we have grown up seeing the likes of the iPhone come in, there are others that are still millennials but have actually had a much more basic childhood.
Yeah.
And to see a mobile phone in everyone's pockets at their age would have been completely foreign, and it would have been such a crazy idea. And now we've got cars that supposedly are going to be driverless. So that sort of shows how quickly the world does change.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because we could have an entire pod just arguing about what is a millennial. But I think as long as we're not here to argue about what is a millennial, what isn't a millennial.
I quite like arguments, though.
Yeah.
We can have a pod arguing about what is a millennial and what isn't a millennial. But for the purpose of the guests, I think as long as we know roughly, we're looking in that age bracket, like what, 18 to 35 sort of thing?
Yeah, that is it. 18 to 35.
Pretty much.
18 to 35. Personally, myself, I've always thought of as a millennial as us, but not much older than us. I think that's interesting to know.
Whereas we're actually on the younger side of it.
Especially from a perspective of career progression, it will be interesting if there's, say, a business person who's 20 and a business person who's 35, like what are the differences between what they've done, and if like that time gap has had a massive impact on their success.
And that is a long time gap as well.
That is a long time gap. So I think having that scope, while it might make things seem super broad and a bit wishy-washy, I think for the purposes of the pod could actually be really interesting to look at.
Yeah, because it's weird that we could sort of see like the normality of something so simple as an email, whereas like outside of my work life, I haven't sent a letter like since I've sent a postcard, maybe when I was 10.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's just slightly strange to see how we can send a text, we can WhatsApp, we can Skype or FaceTime, whereas our parents are bordering, I know mine certainly are bordering on technophobes.
Likewise.
My dad still is sort of hell-bent on calling Snapchat Snapperchat.
Snapperchat.
My mum says flaptop.
What is interesting, saying that about WhatsApp and Snapchat, Ross, is that even though that's become such a normalised part of our lives, that's all happened since we've been alive, and not even that recently, like in the last kind of 5-6 years.
Yeah, we've seen a massive increase in kind of alternative social media or media platforms, which my parents certainly are not familiar with. They wouldn't understand how to navigate Snapchat or Snapperchat. And that's a big point. I think it'll be interesting to kind of interview these millennials and kind of see their take on it, and potentially if that has aided them or held them back in their progression.
Yeah, and even if you go the other way, like if you think about someone who was born in 2006, from the age where they've started to use technology and stuff, one, it will be much younger, and two, that will always be a part of our life. So even when we were kind of 10 years old, most of this stuff wasn't like Facebook wasn't about. None of this stuff was about. So it's interesting that we've actually grown up in like a really interesting time.
The transition.
Yeah.
When we were 11, Zuckerberg, who is also a millennial, would have probably been in his dorm room with his mates talking about this idea that he's got.
Exactly.
And look where that's come.
You never know, boys. This podcast might be the start of something special.
I think it will, Ross.
Having been sat here for 3 hours, I'm not certain.
We all start somewhere. They say it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert. We're in tune. How did you know I was going to say that?
Because I've heard it before.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, 10,000 hours to become a professional at something or an expert.
Expert in one thing.
That is actually interesting, though.
That is, isn't it?
It's gonna take a while.
And on that note, that has been our first 15 minutes of 10,000 hours. Thank you very much for listening to session number 1, our intro pod to the Ball Sessions. I've been Henry Martin.
I've been Tom West.
And for as long as I can remember, I've been Ross Jeffries.
Be sure to check us out on Instagram at The Ball Sessions or find us on Facebook.
You can also contact us via theballsessionspod@gmail.com.
You can catch us on Wednesday for session 2.
See you later.
Thank you.
The bows are sharp.